I've got something that I want to talk about this week. I've noticed that I have a habit of getting complacent. When there's pressure, especially financial pressure, I can be really creative. I always manage to solve the problems and I get really great results. But the minute I feel I've got enough money in the business, there's something in me that sort of says, okay, that's all right. We'll have a little bit of a rest now. And then I start to feel pressure again at a certain point, and then I go into action again. And I could call that a rhythm, but it doesn't feel a very healthy rhythm, because I can see that it would actually be really good for me to keep on growing it in between, not by putting myself under a lot of pressure, but just I have a feeling there's a mentality that I'm lacking. And I know that I'm not the only person, because I see lots of people who have this kind of pressure complacency mindset, and I'm sure you've seen lots of great examples of how to avoid that or how to get better at it.
Yeah, it is a thing, and I see it often in business owners, and see it in different phases of business too. So, especially in my profession in the accountancy firms, where people are running businesses and they get to a certain size and a certain level of comfort, and they become reasonably comfortable. And when they become comfortable, then the business seems to stagnate and plateau. Okay, it's probably the result of that. So it is definitely a thing. And so what you're experiencing and what you're feeling is quite a normal experience for a lot of people. That doesn't necessarily mean it's for everybody, but it's certainly for a lot of people. And I'm concerned about the answer that I will give to this may not necessarily be the answer that you'll accept or feel comfortable with, or that other people will do as well, in terms of what is the difference between somebody who actually doesn't fall into that pattern compared to somebody that does fall into that pattern. And it's a word that I use often, and it's called discipline. Okay, so it's about focus and discipline. And I know that sometimes that can be seen to be a bit of a negative term or a negative word in terms of when you say it's a discipline of things, and it's the discipline of continually that consistency. So when we talk about marketing, for example, because that's what you're talking about in terms of growing a business, it starts with the marketing, then the sales, and then the delivery of it. And when you're talking about marketing, my formula for marketing is that there's no silver bullets for marketing and lead generation. It's constant and consistent. So therefore it's constant and consistent application of multiple activity to be able to deliver the results that we want to have. So it's like an engine that keeps churning and churning and churning through. The problem with, on that analogy, is that when people make a number of sales and they get busy, what happens is that they go, I'll just start to deliver, and they'll forget about cranking the engine again. And so all of a sudden the engine runs out of petrol and it stops. And then all of a sudden you wake up and you've actually got no new leads coming through, no new conversions, you're finished, and then you've got to restart the engine, put you under pressure again, and then you've got to restart the engine again. So I often talk about the fact that you've got to constantly keep your eye on the things that will keep delivering the results in the future. So the way that I've always done it, and the way that I constantly think about the future, is that I'm not thinking about today or tomorrow. I'm thinking 3 to 6 months down the track all the time. So I'm not about today. It's about, yes, I've got to deliver a whole lot of things today, but in what I'm building in today, I've got to know is going to actually help me think about what's it going to look like in 3 to 6 months' time. Okay, so that's kind of some of the initial thoughts that I've got around what you're talking about there.
Well, first of all, I will say that I'm not afraid of the word discipline, because I'm quite disciplined personally. Mm-hmm. I can't speak for everyone else, because I know lots of people aren't very disciplined and they don't like it. But I also use the word quite a lot. But what I can see is exactly what you're saying, is that I will shift the focus of my discipline to something else. So I'll go probably through a burst of activity where I make certain things happen, and that might be about bringing in promotional opportunities. For me, it will often be interviews and things. That's where I get most of my marketing, is by being interviewed. And then when I've got a little rush of them, I take my attention away from that, so I don't have the machine, I guess, is what we're saying. I have a rather enthusiastic, an enthusiastic approach rather than a consistent approach. And I think that brings up something really interesting, is because the fear around this is becoming like one of those people who's really driven, and who drives themselves so hard in the pursuit of constantly growing the business that they lose sight of life. And so I can feel when you start to talk about the machine, although I can see the machine you're talking about is actually people doing things consistently. That fear doesn't need to come up. But I think again that I won't be alone in saying, well, I want the results, but I don't want that way of doing it, because I don't want to become one of those people. So have you seen people do this gracefully?
That's a really good point.
Beautifully.
That you make around. Well, it's actually a really good point that you make, because what you're sort of saying is what you're delving into is saying, why do I do this? What's the pattern? Why am I? And you're saying there's potentially a concern or a fear around that if I do that, then this will be the result. And the result is I'll turn into a person or a business that is not attractive to me. That's what you're really saying.
Exactly.
And speaking probably from personal experience of being on probably periods of my life and business, being that person that you're talking about.
I don't want to be like that. I don't want to do what Matt does.
and I can be that the example of the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of not going through that cycle, is that constant drive and that constant drive of the machine and keeping the machine turning over and over and over again.
And being driven by numbers all the time, because numbers are to me the outcome of the business, and they shouldn't drive the business. What should drive the business is the why, the purpose of the business. And then if you do that well, you have to have the right numbers, otherwise you can't do your purpose. Like if I say, well, I don't want any money, I won't be able to do my purpose. So it's also that. It's about how to create this relationship with the business and with the marketing and the activities that need to be done. So when we've got the horse in front of the cart, so to me it's like I don't want to be driven by the numbers. I want to be driven by the purpose. I need to have that view on the future, which you said. And at the same time, I don't want to become that person who is so driven that they're not enjoying life at all anymore. They're not happy.
And that makes sense. And I see this time and time again. And also I've been guilty of it over the 20 plus years of being in business myself. And I agree. And what came to mind then is the concept that, if you build it, they will come sort of type principle, as opposed to constantly looking at, well, this is what I've built, and then they've got to come. So therefore, that's when you get driven by the numbers. But
wait, I didn't catch that. I didn't understand the difference between if you build it, they'll come, and this is what I've built.
So this is what I'm about to explain there in terms of the way that that you spoke about it. Then I don't want to be driven by the numbers. I want to be driven by the purpose, okay? And so to keep ourselves motivated to continually do the disciplined thing, to keep the engine turning, which is what we were speaking about before, it comes back to that word purpose, like we've spoken about a lot in terms of that, and that's the basis of the spirit of business that we often, which is obviously the topic of the podcast. And I link it back to that noble goal that we spoke about before, because if we're saying that this is my purpose and this is what I want to achieve, and that achievement, okay, we need to be able to measure it, for want of a better word, because how do you know when your future's turned up if you haven't actually measured what goal you want to have to be able to measure against that particular goal? And so therefore that's where the noble goal comes into place, because it's a better feeling to me to have a noble goal that I can measure, as opposed to just a number that's driving me like a profit or cash in the bank. Because I think that's maybe what you're talking about. I get enough cash in the bank to satisfy myself, and then everything will just calm down a bit, and then I'll go again. So there's got to be some other motivating factor to keep you disciplined and driving the engine, as in churning the engine over, to get that consistency to scale your business appropriately. That's kind of the way that I see it.
Yeah, but this is so interesting as I listen to you, because what I realize is that somewhere in my mind, even in those lull periods, I'm not abandoning my business. And I'm often, when I look at scaling it, what I realize is, as I was listening to you, I was thinking, well, if I sell 100 courses or 1,000 courses, of course it's better to sell 1,000 courses, but it almost feels like a missing piece, but I don't think it is. There's something in me that's saying that's not the point, that's not the point. Counting how many courses I've sold is kind of important, but it's not the point. So I know that selling courses is how I fulfill the purpose of my business. At a very simple level, selling courses or people completing courses is the simplest measure of effectiveness in my purpose. But as I'm listening to you, and I feel very driven or very drawn by my purpose, I still don't feel very drawn or driven by selling another 50 courses or another 1,000 courses. And I'm looking at what I'm interested in is creating systems, perhaps that would sell thousands of courses down the line. So is it that actually I'm busy doing something that's really valuable, but I'm just missing taking care of the present?